Okay, this is over Chapter 1, Objective 5, Homeostasis. The definition of homeostasis is the steady state of internal conditions maintained by living things. So, what does that mean? Basically, it means the body has got to maintain a certain set of environmental conditions, and the body is going to adjust to make sure those are kept constant at all times. In order to do that, it's got to constantly monitor the internal environment of the body. For example, your temperature, and I keep going back to body temperature because it's something we're familiar with, body temperature is 98.6. In order to maintain 98.6, it has to constantly monitor the body temperature so that if it goes above 98.6 or below 98.6, it can immediately fix it. It's not that the body says, oh, it's Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. I think I'm going to check what the temperature is today. No, it's constantly 24/7 being monitored. So anytime it goes outside of that range, it's immediately taken care of. Each physiological condition, such as, for example, temperature, has got this set point. For example, set point for temperature is 98.6. That is the normal body temperature. And there's a certain range where that would be acceptable. A little bit above, a little bit below might be okay. pH, the range, the set point for that is 7.34 to 7.45. That really can't go much outside that range. That's pretty much it. I mean, that's going to be it. You'll see in a little bit. Heart rate is roughly around 60 to 100 beats per minute when the person is at rest. So that's the normal set point. So every physiological condition, um, heart rate, blood pressure, sugar in the blood, calcium in the blood, the amount of water that you have, all of these are constantly being maintained and being looked at. So, a possible question, I mean, how could I ask this on the test? Again, not exactly the same question, but you get the idea. Homeostasis is defined as the ability of human beings to maintain a low body weight? No. Maintenance of a constant room temperature? Whoops, sorry. No. Ability of human beings, I'm sorry, number C, capability of the body to maintain a relatively constant internal environment? Yes. Digestion of food compounds as soon as they are eaten? No. So again, when you're taking the test, make sure you read all answer choices, okay? Feedback mechanisms. There are two feedback mechanisms that the body can use. One of them is negative feedback. The other one is positive feedback. So what's the difference between the two? Well, negative feedback is actually what's going to help maintain homeostasis. So we like that one. That negative feedback is a good thing, even though it kind of has a negative name in it, right? But it's actually a good thing. We like negative feedback. It returns the body back to normal. So, for example, if the body goes too high in body temperature, if it goes above 98.6, the negative feedback mechanism will lower body temperature and bring it back to normal. Conversely, if body temperature were to drop too low, let's say it was 90 something, 90.2, negative feedback would bring it up and return it to normal. So it doesn't matter whether it's too high or too low, whatever's being registered, if it's too high or too low, negative feedback brings you back to normal. However, so therefore it maintains homeostasis. Positive feedback, however, intensifies the change. It makes it worse. So if the body temperature is running too high, positive feedback would make it go even higher. It'd get it further away from normal. If the body temperature were too low, positive feedback would take it even lower. It would take it further away from normal, further away from set point. So this is not a good thing. This does not help maintain homeostasis. So, looking at negative feedback, there's actually three basic components to negative feedback. If we're going to fix a problem, first we have to know that there is a problem. So, in order to do that, the sensors have to be continuously monitoring the physiological conditions. So, the sensor, also known as a receptor, is going to monitor these values. And so, for every condition, you have a certain sensor. It's not like one sensor senses everything. You have a sensor for blood pressure, you have a sensor for temperature, you have a sensor for glucose, and they're all going back and communicating with the brain for the most part to let the brain know, hey, what's going on in the body. So the sensor detects the issue, detects the problem. So when we say stimulus, what we really mean is the problem. The stimulus is the problem. I will say this, the sensor doesn't know whether it's sending you information that's out of range or information that's in range. So in other words, you have temperature sensors in your skin that are detecting body temperature. So if your body temperature is 98.6, the sensor is going to go and tell the brain, it's going to send a message to the brain saying, hey, it's 98.6 in the skin. And the brain says, also known as the control center, oh, okay, thank you for sending me that. That's fine. It's actually normal. The sensor doesn't know it's normal. So if the body temperature goes up to like 100.2, the sensor would send that as well. Body temperature 100.2. And then when it gets to the brain compares it to what normal should be and says, oh, you're telling me the skin is sitting at 100.2. I'm sitting here looking at my chart and it says temperature is supposed to be 98.6. That's out of range. Let's fix the problem. So the sensor is just sending the information in. It doesn't really know whether it's out of range or in range. The control center is what actually compares the incoming value with what set point should be, with the normal range. So if the reported range is too far away from set point, the control center also determines how to fix it and tells the right parts of the body how to fix it. So the effector is what does the work. It fixes the problem. And it depends on the problem as to what the effector is going to be. But it's the component of the feedback mechanism that causes the change to reverse the initial situation and return the value to normal. So for example, let's take a look at temperature regulation. So up here we have something that causes the body temperature to decrease. Maybe you got locked in a freezer or something. So the stimulus, the problem is body temperature is going to get lower. We're going to lower body temperature. That's the problem. The thermoreceptors in the skin detect that change and send the information to the control center. Now, in this situation, the control center is in the brain. It's a part of the brain known as the hypothalamus. And that hypothalamus, which is just a part of the brain, takes a look at what is being brought in by the sensors and compares it to what normal should be. Again, 98.6, that's your set point. So the control center says, wait a minute, it's too low. Temperature's too low. I'm going to tell the muscles to contract, which is an effector for temperature regulation, and I'm going to tell the blood vessels to constrict. So these are the two effectors for temperature regulation. These are the two that are going to solve the problem. Now, blood vessels aren't going to constrict just on their own. Muscles aren't going to shiver on their own. They have to be told what to do. So until they get the message from the hypothalamus, they're not going to shiver. They're not going to constrict. They just don't wake up one morning and say, oh, it's Wednesday morning. I think I'm going to constrict today. That's not how that works. So they don't do anything unless they receive a message from the control center. And then when the muscles shiver, when in combination, when the blood vessels constrict, that will raise body temperature back up to normal. And then the cycle will be finished. Sorry about that. Okay. The reverse would also be a situation of negative feedback and how that's being controlled. So what happens if the temperature of the body goes up? Again, that's the stimulus. That's going to be the problem. So body temperature increasing is the issue. The thermoreceptors in the skin send that information to the control center, hypothalamus in the brain. And now the hypothalamus, because the temperature is going up, they have to talk to different effectors. They're not going to talk to the same ones that dealt with low body temperature. They're going to talk to ones to help fix high body temperature. So who are they going to talk to? They're going to communicate with the sweat glands. So the sweat glands will start making sweat. Again, you don't sweat when it's cold. Why? Because the hypothalamus isn't telling the sweat glands to do anything. They have to be told when to make sweat. They just don't do it because they feel like it. They have to be given the signal. So when the hypothalamus sends the message, the sweat glands start making sweat. Also, the blood vessels are going to dilate. They're going to get larger in diameter. So those two events are going to occur when body temperature gets too high. That will result in body temperature decreasing, which will bring you back to normal, completing the negative feedback cycle. Now, these are examples that I'm giving you. I'm not going to ask you about these examples on the test. I'm just trying to explain to you how the process works so you can kind of see how all the parts fit together. So the definitions of these stimulus, sensor, control center, effector make sense. Okay. I also have an example on um, blood glucose regulation if you want to look at that. I've also got one on, again, blood glucose too high, blood glucose too low. So those are, again, just more examples of negative feedback if you wanted to take a look at that. I'm just asking you the definition of negative feedback and the components involved and what they do. Now, what is positive feedback? Positive feedback intensifies the change. It makes the problem worse. It makes the stimulus worse. So it can create a cycle that leads away from homeostasis and can ultimately result in death. So there are actually two beneficial examples of positive feedback that I'm going to show you. All the other ones would be a negative problem, meaning it would actually cause the body, would cause death to occur. These two are actually good things. These two are good examples of positive feedback that are productive. Okay. So all the other examples I could give you would be harmful. They will eventually result in death. The example that we're going to look at is the delivery of blood to the heart. Okay. Looking at blood clotting. So, your circulatory system is a closed circulatory system, which means the blood is supposed to remain in the blood vessels. So when there's a tear in the blood vessel, the blood starts to leak out, and that sends a signal. Uh, the stimulus, that's the problem. We've got a problem. We got a tear in a blood vessel. That's going to send a signal. The platelets are going to pick up on that. Platelets help blood to clot. They're a cell found in blood, along with white blood cells and red blood cells, but the platelets are involved in clotting. They actually are going to start clumping together. They get a signal saying, hey, the problem is over here. And they go to that area when they start clotting together, and they're going to release some chemicals to bring more platelets on board. So more platelets show up to the scene and they start clotting. And as more platelets show up, they're going to release more chemicals to attract even more platelets. So you have this condition of one thing causing the other to intensify. And eventually this cycle will stop when the blood stops coming out of the blood vessel, when the hole is sealed. Okay, so that's when it kind of stops. Childbirth would be another beneficial example of positive feedback. So the baby moves towards the cervix, which is going to be the passageway leading out of the uterus. As the baby moves into the cervix, it's going to stretch that tissue. That's the stimulus, the cervix stretching. Stretch receptors pick that up, and they're going to send that information of, hey, the cervix is being stretched, to the control center, which, guess what, happens to be the hypothalamus again. So the hypothalamus gets the information that the cervix is being stretched, and it's going to communicate with the pituitary gland, specifically the posterior pituitary, to release this hormone called oxytocin. So again, the hypothalamus has a lot of control. We saw it talking earlier to blood vessels and whether they're going to dilate or constrict. We saw it talking to sweat glands. We saw it talking to skeletal muscle to shiver. Here, the hypothalamus is talking to something else. It's talking to the posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin. So when oxytocin is released, it's going to go, sorry about that, it's going to target the uterus and cause the uterus to contract. When the uterus contracts, it's going to then cause the cervix to stretch even more because it's pushing the baby further into the cervix, which is going to stretch the cervix even more, intensifying the issue, making it worse. Again, causing the hypothalamus to secrete even more oxytocin, causing the uterus to contract even more, resulting in the baby being pushed down into the cervix further, causing the cervix to stretch even more. So again, this is just going to keep intensifying over time until the baby's born. Once the baby's born, the cycle stops. Okay, before we talk about this harmful situation of positive feedback, we need to know a little bit about the heart. So here's a picture of the heart, and you can see all these blood vessels here, these blue and red blood vessels that are bringing oxygenated blood to the heart, the red ones, and taking deoxygenated blood away from the heart, the blue ones. So I know that blood travels through the heart, but when it does that, it's not actually passing gases between the cells. It's just passing through the heart. There's no time for gas exchange. That happens in these blood vessels that supply the heart directly with blood. So your heart is an organ. It's made up of cells, cardiac muscle cells. These cells require oxygen in order to function. Um, Oxygen travels to the cells by way of these little bitty blood vessels called coronary blood vessels. Without oxygen, the cells will die. So blood can travel through the heart all at once, but that's not supplying the heart itself with oxygenated blood. It needs these little blood vessels here to actually get the oxygen to the heart muscle cells. Every time your heart beats, oxygenated blood goes to the heart, along with every other organ. So when blood pressure drops, it's going to decrease blood flow to the heart muscle cells. Blood flow is not going to go to the heart as much because you just dropped the blood pressure. When that happens, you're going to decrease the amount of oxygen supply to those heart muscle cells. Well, if the heart muscle cells don't have the oxygen coming to them, they're not going to function very well, which means they're not going to contract. If they don't contract, blood pressure is going to drop even more. So you're going to have this runaway cycle of decreasing blood pressure, lack of blood flow to the heart, cells aren't going to work, the heart muscle cells aren't going to work, which means blood pressure is going to drop even more until eventually the heart will stop beating completely and the patient dies. So again, harmful example. So let's look at an example test question, okay? Example 12. I don't know why. So in a negative feedback mechanism, what is the response of the effector? So remember there were three parts. What was the effector? It enhances the activity on the original stimulus? No, that was positive feedback, not negative feedback. So it's not number A, it's not letter A. Has no effect on the activity of the stimulus. No, the effector definitely has an effect on the stimulus. Is usually harmful for the body? Again, that would be positive feedback. D, reverses the activity of the original stimulus. The answer is D. So in a negative feedback situation, the effector reverses the problem. Remember, the stimulus is the problem. Okay, and that was all for objective 5.